In this video, I'm going to talk about how I handle no-shows, people that are late, people that need to reschedule. This video is actually super applicable to you, whether you're doing sales consultation calls or podcast interviews. But because this channel is all about podcast guesting, I'm going to focus a little bit more on that. But again, this really applies to you with whatever types of calls you're doing. And I was inspired to talk about this because I did a post about this on LinkedIn. And essentially the post just said, I would like to thank anyone who actually RSVPs, yes, emails to confirm, and shows up on time for a call, because it is so unfortunately common that people don't show up, they're late, they don't confirm to the calendar events. I don't know what people's scheduling situation looks like, but it seems like it's kind of a train wreck for a lot of people. And when you're coordinating and doing podcast interviews, it's really important to be on time, to be communicative, because that process and the communication with a host, with a guest, before the recording actually happens is really setting the tone for the actual interview. And I've experienced both sides of the spectrum. I have been interviewed and scheduled and recorded on podcasts where the host had such an incredible system. There was a meeting link. The host or their producer or their assistant was super responsive. It went right onto my calendar. They were on time. They were early. They were prepared. Everything was great. And then I've had the opposite end of the spectrum where the host didn't have a meeting link, so we're scheduling manually, and then they had the wrong time, and it was like last minute cancellations, reschedules. And then even no-shows or late. I've done podcast interviews where I'm just sitting there waiting 5-10 minutes and the host is late and they don't apologize. And so there is a wide range of experiences, unfortunately, when you're doing podcast interviews, because what I like to always say is, well, when you're podcast guesting, you're dealing with humans, and humans be human. They are all over the place. And so how I handle it is, number one, I have integrity and I lead by example. And so I am meticulous about my calendar. I am early/on time for all my calls. Like, I'm going to set the tone first for the standard that I would expect everyone else to have as well. So that's number one. I act as in the way that I would want to be treated. I'm going to RSVP. I'm going to, confirm calls. I'm going to show up on time. I'm going to be prepared. So I think that's number one. Make sure that how you want to be treated from a podcast host, them being on time, them being prepared, them showing up, all of that. You're also doing that in your life with your other interviews, with your other calls. That's first and foremost. So you have a standard that you are, upholding. When I am scheduling with the host, I'm really responsive. So this is super helpful when you're responsive right away to a booking and you're scheduling. You're getting it onto your calendar, you're confirming, you're making sure you have all the information. So I'm going to over communicate, I'm going to over ask, I'm going to make sure that I have all the information that I need to make sure that this interview happens, it happens on time, and it happens in a way that we're all prepared. Now, sometimes hosts are not responsive. They're not responding to the email right away. They're, not confirming. They're not providing the information. So again, all that I can do, I can't control them, but I can control myself. So I'm going to over communicate. I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to, reach out on LinkedIn if I need to confirm. And then when the actual interview happens or the call, again, this is really applicable to sales calls and interviews and everything like that. I have my standard of how long I'm going to wait. So if the person is late 3-4 minutes, I'm going to shoot them a quick email. Hey, am I in the right room? I'm here. You're not here. What's going on? And then about 7 minutes is usually my cutoff. And that's when I'll leave and send them an email and say, what happened? I didn't see you there. So that's how I handle it. And then mentally, emotionally, I don't get too frustrated and angry. And this is a big pitfall that a lot of people fall into, is they get really frustrated. They're like, how dare this person? This was such a bad experience. And it is frustrating when someone doesn't show up. It is frustrating when they are late. But you also have to know that you have no idea what is happening in someone else's life. You have no idea if their spouse just got into a car accident, if their kid was called home from school sick. You have no idea if something happened to them. They got a migraine, all of a sudden they had to sign off, they can't see. Like, you just don't No. And so how I handle it, that's like logistically, I'm going to send an email. I have my standard for how long I'm going to wait on the Zoom before I take action and leave and decide if I'm going to reschedule or not. But also it's really important how I handle it emotionally is I'm not going to get angry. I'm not going to make the other person wrong. I will decide if I'm willing to reschedule or not, depending on what the experience has been up until that point. But I won't make them wrong because I know that they likely have a whole host of issues in their life that cause them to be late. And it's not my responsibility to decide if that is a worthy enough excuse. I'm just going to decide how I'm going to handle it. So that's what I do to handle it, because when you're doing podcast interviews, you're especially on multiple shows a month, you're going to be interviewing with podcasters who have a range of standards in their own integrity and in their own ability to show up on time. So I hope this video was helpful. I highly recommend being a podcast guest, doing it regularly, even though it means sometimes there's going to be scheduling issues. Sometimes people may be late or need to reschedule at the last minute. I mean, that happens too. But the visibility that you get from it, the relationships that you get from it, the practice you get networking and communicating with other people, all those pros far outweigh the cons of sometimes there are logistical issues with scheduling and things like that. So if you want help getting booked on podcasts, that is exactly what we do at Interview Connections. You can go to interviewconnections.com to book a consultation call and subscribe to our channel. We post lots of videos with tips and helpful stories and information about podcast guesting.